your first book. Could you give us some background detail as to how it all came about?
Sure. Well, I work as a construction manager, and I used to work up here on the moors for quite a few years. And round about 2003, I was involved nearby with looking after the properties in a particular village. And we started to have very nasty problems with one of the houses, and no one could sleep there. They had terrible migraines, had an awful feeling about the place. And I was given the job of finding out why and putting it right. So.
And you thought this was sort of a construction issue or something like that?
I sent in my electricians and plumbers, and we checked out various things, and we checked for fumes, electromagnetic fields, and everything you could think of. And we found there was a 60-volt charge on the roof, but apart from that we couldn't really find anything else wrong. It was mysterious. We then decided to bring in some outside help, and we found some people called geomancers who are experts on everything below the ground. They're sort of like mediums in relation to ghosts, but there was nothing ghostly going on that we were aware of.
But what drove you down that particular route? And I mean,
well, we knew there were some electric cables nearby, and I checked out those, and they were all fine. We thought it might be a sort of underground problem, as we couldn't find anything above ground. And these chaps came along and told us that we had some ley lines under the house, which are long, straight, invisible lines of energy, and we had 3 of those under the house, which is quite rare. But they said, apart from that, you actually have a worse problem, because the house is surrounded by elementals and they're all angry. And we said, hang on, elementals? And they said, well, think of them as elves, if you like, or goblins, but they're very angry, and you've got to do something about it, else no one's ever going to live here again. So.
Well, how come you didn't sort of say thank you very much and put the phone down at that point and think, you know, I'm in wacky world here, you know?
Well, I would have, but for the fact that they didn't know, they'd never been here before, and they said that the problem that these elementals were having is that we interrupted the water supply to their stone drinking trough in the trees. And they didn't know there was a stone drinking trough in the trees, but we knew there was, and we had indeed interrupted the water supply to it, in fact stopped it completely a few weeks previously. And we, as you can imagine, we reinstated that water supply pretty quickly, and within a day or so the house was completely back to normal. Well, that got me thinking quite a lot, and very strange, I thought. It was perhaps the case was made stronger that something was going on a few weeks later, when we had an incident right next door, just yards away, where 2 men ended up fighting over sightings, multiple sightings of a little fella, if you like, an elf or whatever, sat in the tree watching them work. These were 2 builders, and they had been friends, but they ended up fighting, and that got me thinking and got me looking into the subject more, and I've started to find out about the local folklore and all the different types of characters that are out there that perhaps most of us don't know about, or only know of from childhood stories in fairy tale books.
And had you had any interest in this area at all before going down this particular path?
I can honestly say none. I mean, I loved fairy tales when I was a kid, like everyone else, but that was it. But when I started to find out more about them, the fact that an elf, for example, is 5 to 6 feet high and can be of the dark or light variety, and the dark variety are really nasty characters, you start to find out more and more about them. And elves have been part of every primitive tribe, the beliefs of every primitive tribe since the 8th century. They're a really long-established part of civilization. So.
But also, what did the people think who you know that you were working for, and your family think when you were going down this particular trail? What was their kind of response?
Well, they were jealous, like I was, that I couldn't actually see these little creatures. But no, they were interested, and when I started to find out more about them in my research, they encouraged me. They said, well, it's something not many people know about, and it would be interesting to find out about them. And then I started to think about actually writing a story, not around those events I've just described, but a whole new story set on the North Yorkshire moors, set locally, and involving lots of the characters that I've started to learn about. And it turned out to be quite a scary story, but it's got all. The story would bring out all your emotions, really. You know, joy, fear, tears, everything you can think of. So hopefully it's a good book.
And there's lots of local landmarks in it that would people
Absolutely. There's a map at the beginning of the book, and actually there's a short description of the case I just described to you, and a warning for the reader that perhaps what they're about to read is not all as made up as you'd imagine. Certainly the characters could be extremely real. It's just that mostly they stay out of sight, fortunately. But no, there's a map there. We're here in the Lion Inn, and the Lion Inn is just on the edge of my map. And the story is set in Farndale and Rosedale, everywhere in between, and it features two 15-year-old friends, a boy and a girl, lifelong friends, soulmates really. They know how each other thinks. They're, you know, really close friends, and they get into they have a huge problem to solve, and the story is how they try to solve it. Whether they solve it or not, I'll leave you to find out if we ever get to the end of the book. But they end up meeting elves, which is something I was very keen to try and describe in writing, because I'm not aware that it's been attempted many times before, if at all. Real teenagers meeting real 5-6 foot high elves of the nice kind and of the nasty kind, plus a host of other characters. And I found that very interesting, that tackling that problem I found intriguing and interesting. So that's how the book sort of developed. The teenagers have a problem to solve, and it turns out that the light elves that they buddy up with also have a problem to solve, their own problem. So they each have a quest, and they sort of work together to try and solve those problems. But there's a lot of hardship along the way. It's set during a very cold December up here on the moors. Blizzards, rain, sleet, everything you can imagine. But it's a beautiful place, and the book's also, funnily enough, it's also a tribute to the landscape, because I've always loved the moors. It's a beautiful place, and I've tried to describe in my book its different faces in different weathers. But it was a long journey for the teenagers and everyone else in it, and there were casualties along the way, and happy parts and sad parts.
And it's been quite a long journey for you too, hasn't it, writing this book? Tell us how...
It was a long journey. It's always been a hobby, because I'm a civil engineer, so I couldn't do it full time, so it's always been a hobby, but it probably took 5 years of hobby time to write, after a year of research. And then once it was written, I didn't know at the time, but you actually have to write a book several times before you get it right. So it's been written several times, like every other new book, and it then takes quite a while, a couple of years to find someone that wants to publish it for you. So it is you have to stick at it and persevere.
But here we are, it's been published, you have it on your lap there.
Yes,
so that's great.
You
You must feel so, pleased now you've got to this